Hey, what's up? It's me, Brian Lagerstrom, and I want to talk about rolls. You guys have heard of them. They're so much more than just a mop for your gravy. I mean, they're a mop for your gravy, of course, but they're also so much more than that. Today, I'm going to show you how to make two types. One is going to be a crusty, rustic little number, and then I'm also going to show you my favorite roll of all time. So stick around, it could get crazy. To get started here, I'm gonna mix a little pre-ferment, or what I would call poolish, for the rolls. For that, we're gonna measure 110 grams of water, a very small pinch of yeast, like 20 to 30 granules, and then 110 grams of all-purpose flour. I'm just gonna stir all this up to combine, and at this point, it should look like thick pancake batter. I'm gonna throw a lid on this and let it ferment on the counter for a minimum of 6 hours, but preferably like 12 or even 18 hours. Anytime I wanna bring more flavor to a simple yeasted dough like this, I prefer to mix some of the flour and water in a very small amount of yeast ahead of time and let it ferment. After 12 hours, the poolish we made is looking very ripe. It's gassy and it smells yeasty and sweet. So to actually mix the dough for these crusty rolls, we're gonna grab your classic trusty medium stainless steel bowl. And into that, we're gonna measure 210 grams of warm water, 2 grams of yeast, all of the right poolish that we've got here. And I'm gonna make sure to stir that well into the water. Behind that, I'm gonna measure in 260 grams of all-purpose flour, 35 grams of whole wheat flour, and 8 grams of salt. Using a sturdy metal spoon, I'm gonna stir all this up to combine. I like to rotate the bowl a little bit so I can really get in there and get all the best angles for mixing this thing up. And there we go. Once it's combined, I'm gonna get rid of the spoon and I'm gonna wet my hand really well and go in to finish it off. This move is a pinch/rotate the bowl thing that replicates the slow, methodical motion of a pro-level orbital mixer. Once I'm feeling like things are homogeneous and well combined, I'm gonna fold it up and tuck it under itself to create a little bit of tension. This is the first little bit of strength needed for these crusty rolls to stand up on their own free will in the oven. Lastly, I'm gonna wrap the bowl with plastic wrap and let this dough ferment on the counter for 30 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna come back after 30 minutes and give the dough a quick strength building fold. For that, get a grip of dough in your hand, pull it out till it's tight, and then fold it over. I'm gonna go around the bowl this way, repeating that fold 4 more times, and then I'm gonna fold in the corners, and then roll that seam side over and tuck it up onto itself to preserve that tension. There we go. I'm gonna wrap this with plastic wrap and pull it tight. Woo, 90 minutes later. 2 total hours of fermentation here. The dough looks buoyant and gaseous and passes the finger dent test. That means we're ready to shape. So for that, I'm gonna grab my scale. I've had this one for going on 9 years. I think this is the Escali brand. It's pretty rugged and it's very accurate. I'll throw a link down in the description if you guys are interested. Next, I'm gonna dust the dough and my work surface with a little bit of all-purpose flour, and then I'm gonna flip out the dough. I've also got a sheet tray lined with some parchment paper over here, and I'm gonna hit that with a little bit of flour as well. Okay, I'm gonna be trying for 9 pieces out of this dough ball, so I'm gonna cut that into thirds to give me an idea for scale. I'm gonna measure these dough balls into 70-gram pieces, and by the way, if these are sticking to your hands, feel free to keep your fingers well dusted with a little bit of all-purpose flour. I'm gonna move through the portioning of the other 8 pieces here, and once I've got them cut up and divided into 9 70-gram balls, we're gonna shape them. For that, I'm gonna flip a dough ball onto a lightly floured surface, and I'm gonna fold in the corners and pop any huge bubbles that are sitting in the dough, and then I'm gonna flip it over onto the folds, roll it up. That's a little sticky, so I'm gonna get dusted. Get dusted. Yeah. There we go. So as you can see, the move here is to take the dough into the palm of your hand and rotate it, tucking with your fingertips and rolling with your thumb. You end up creating a seam under the roll that holds the tension, and you have a nice little taut ball that's easily going to stand up strong even after it's all gassed up and proofed later on. I'm going to go ahead and shape the other 8 pieces here, laying them out evenly on my parchment as I go. And I know you're asking, can I put these in the fridge overnight? And definitely yes. I would rise them a little bit on the counter, maybe like 60 minutes, and then finish them in the fridge. But make sure they're covered, and when you go to bake them the next day, bake them straight out of the fridge. Okay, once all these rolls are tidied up on this sheet tray, I'm going to cover that with another sheet tray and let them proof in a warm place for 90 minutes. And now we're going to get started on our next roll. To get started there, I'm going to preheat a small saucepan over medium heat. So this next roll is pretty much the opposite of a crusty rustic roll, and it happens to be pretty much my favorite holiday roll of all time. It's going to be a squishy, tender little milk bun that's a little bit sweet and just very craveable. And I'm also going to show you guys a super secret move that's going to make this extra squishy and luxurious, but I'm going to get into that as we go. All right, once that saucepan's preheated, we're going to measure in 45 grams of water and 45 grams of milk that I've already mixed together, and into that I'm going to whisk 15 grams of all-purpose flour. You have to keep stirring to make sure that nothing clumps up. As the flour hydrates and heats up, it's going to thicken pretty quickly. After 30 seconds or so of cooking, now we've got the starter, or tangzhong, for this bread. Cooking the starch like this ahead of time using the tangzhong is going to give us a superior tenderness just like a cooked potato would in a potato roll. Once that's all cooked, I'm gonna set it aside for about 10 minutes and grab my stand mixer. By the way, this dough is pretty tricky to make by hand, so I don't really recommend it. All right, into the bowl of the stand mixer, I'm gonna measure 110 grams of warm-ish milk, 5 grams of yeast, 1 egg, 50 grams of sugar, and all of the cooked milk paste. I let this cool off for about 10 minutes, by the way. Behind that, 350 grams of all-purpose flour and 8 grams of salt. For this, I'm gonna throw the dough hook attachment on and start this on low speed, like actually low medium speed. As that starts to come together, we're gonna add in 60 grams of tempered butter, but not all at once. This is the pro level move here. I'm gonna be adding the butter just like you would to a brioche dough, and adding it in solid like this gives us a much more flaky, almost Pillsbury-ish interior. This is in contrast to just adding melted butter up front. But the butter needs to be pretty much room temperature to get incorporated correctly. Mine was a little bit too chilled here, and you're gonna see little butter flecks in the raw dough later on, but that's not a problem. The desired effect will still be there. Once things are getting well combined, I'm gonna turn this thing up to high speed for a second to finish it off, but be careful. This thing can get a little bit wild and crazy. Just make sure your hands are on top. Okay, once you've got that mixed, we're gonna wrap it up with plastic wrap, put that aside, and then let it rise in the bowl for 90 minutes. And just wait, like this. 90 minutes later, we've got a puffy little dough, but it's not gonna be as risen as the crusty rustic dough was just a minute ago. I'm gonna flip this out onto a work surface, and I'm gonna cut this into 9 75-gram pieces and set them on a sheet tray. Once those are all cut up, I'm gonna grab a simple 8x8 cake pan and a stick of butter, and I'm gonna rub one of them into the other one. Be generous here with the butter. These buns are all about luxury, and having them fry up in a bit of butter honestly goes a really long way. Once that thing's all slicked up with butter, we're gonna shape these rolls. And this is pretty much the same exact approach as we did for the crusty rolls just a minute ago. This time the folding part really isn't necessary, but I am being extra diligent to roll and tuck these in my palm nice and tight. I'm gonna lay these out 3x3 into my buttered cake pan, and ooh, look at this cool little butter spot on my cutting board. This dough is very enriched. I'm very excited to eat these in a minute. Once all 9 of these are rolled up and arranged 3x3 with their seams facing down, I'm gonna cover them with a tea towel and proof on the counter until these are more than doubled, or about 90 minutes, and we'll check back with them then. Let's get back to these rustic crusty rolls. These have been rising for about 90 minutes on my counter, and they've just about doubled. The final proof time here is pretty variable, so use your bread senses the best you can. We should err on the side of a little less proofing with these rolls because they're a little more finicky than the squishy boys we just made, but when I poke them, you can see they bounce back instead of deflate, and that's a good sign. I'm gonna score these rolls with my little baby blue scissors here. Shout out to Joyce Chen. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I'm gonna dust these with a little bit of flour for good looks, and then I'm gonna give 2 scissor cuts per roll. This recipe, by the way, is not far off from the one I developed for the homemade baguette, and all of the steps are pretty much the same. They're tiny little self-contained rustic loaves, and we're scoring them for the same reasons we would a baguette or a boule. Once these little dudes are scored, we're gonna load them into a 465-degree oven with a preheated cast iron pan in it. Into that pan, I'm gonna add about a cup of boiling water, and there, now we have a steam-injected oven. This is gonna give us that superior brittle crust just like we would get at the bakery. After 15 to 20 minutes bake time, depending on your oven, we're gonna pull them out and cool them off. These smell amazing. They're toasty and crispy, and like I said, they're basically little individual sized rustic boules. They're very cute. I'm gonna set these up on a wire rack to cool properly, and I wanna talk about game plan here real quick. I recommend baking these off ahead of the holidays and freezing them once they're cooled off. Then, the day of the shindig, you can throw them into a 425-degree oven and crisp them up and warm them up for like 5 minutes. They're gonna be super crisp and brittle, and there won't be any day of bread labor. While those cool, I'm going to check back on our little squishies. These have more than doubled in that 90 minutes. With this roll, we can err on the side of being more proofed for sure. To get these ready for the oven, we're going to give them a heavy egg wash. That's just egg and a splash of milk that I've stirred up, and I'm being generous, like I said, because I really want a nice shiny lacquered top on these buns. Once these are egg washed, we're going to throw them into a 350-degree oven and bake for 20 to 25 minutes, or until deeply golden brown and well fried on the sides and bottom. Oh my gosh, look at these little jewels. To gild this lily, we're gonna brush generously with some melted butter, and oh yes, a generous amount of butter. Look at this. All right, let's eat these things. Before I get out of here, I just want to say a huge heartfelt thank you to everybody who supports this channel on Ko-fi, specifically everybody who's donated in the last week or so. We've had some really generous donations and it really means a lot. Thank you guys so much. I know you know who you are. I'm looking right at you. Thank you. As always, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for sticking around, and we'll see you in the next one.